Grief and sadness. Today I want to talk a little bit about the process of trying to work through grief. Grief can come up throughout most people's lives at different stages. It can be that they lose a grandparent, they might lose a sibling, they could lose a child, they might lose a parent. Some people lose people to cancer. There's many different reasons. Sometimes people can just lose people out of their lives when they move away, and that can be a very hard and difficult thing to deal with, especially if you're very close to that person. So there's many situations that cause grief to sort of rise up in people's bodies. Now, grief is a very, very strong emotion, and it's very draining, and it can be one that can cause you to become very stuck in your life, because grief is all consuming. It actually takes all your thoughts and they sort of go down this road of sadness. Now, in order to get yourself back from these feelings, it's really important to sort of accept the process of grief. Now, to me, grief is a process. It's not something that you can just kind of click your fingers and everything's great overnight. Grief is something that you kind of have to work through. Like, some people get very sad. Some people get very angry. Some people will suppress their grief and it may not come out for years to come. And it'll, just keep bubbling up sort of to the surface every now and again. And that can come out as anger, or like I said, it can come out as tears or moodiness in people. So everyone experiences grief differently, but you have to kind of accept that grief is a process. Now, it's really important also to understand that if there's people around you who are suffering grief, that you also sort of reach out to them as well, because what happens sometimes when these things happen, people sort of band around you and everyone's around you at the time when something happens, but then they sort of disappear and they go back to their own lives, and everybody sort of forgets about that person who's still left there grieving and sort of stuck in their sadness. So it's also important to actually be aware of that and touch base with those people and check on them and how they're going, and try and get them out doing things and get them distracted from their thoughts. And that's the best way of dealing with grief, is to actually look at things that can help yourself as well. So you've got to look at taking your pets, like for a dog, for a walk, or going to the beach and getting that sea air, and just hearing the ocean. Things like this are actually very relaxing. Going for a bushwalk, catching up with friends and having a laugh, going to the movies, going to a very funny movie is a great way to actually distract yourself for a couple of hours from the sadness and the grief, because that grief really can contract your body and it can affect people's breathing. It can just be so overwhelming that people just sometimes can't feel like they can even go on with their life. And this is what happens sometimes when people get very, very deep depression as well. It's very hard for them to actually see any light at all and how they could possibly move forward. So sometimes it's in those little things that can actually switch that switch and sort of give you that couple of hours break from the pain, the sadness and the grief. So also reach out to people. Like I said, if you see people are grieving, don't just forget about them, because this process can go on for quite a while when people are in that sadness. So be aware of that. Look out for people that are grieving. But when you're going through grief yourself, you have to accept that it is a process and that only time will kind of heal these things. You may not ever really get over the grief of something, but it will actually soften in time, and you will sort of get your head around how to kind of go forward. So accept that it is a process. Grief isn't easy to deal with, and like I said, everybody deals with it differently, but there is always light at the end of grief, because it is a process and it is a part of life. Like, we all come to this earth, but we all die. So it's just sort of a natural progression of life. So it's something that we kind of have to accept as well. But yeah, grief, it's not easy, but also be aware of people around you that are suffering it and see if you can help them to find that bit of relief from the pain. Bye.